Our friend Gerard Baker, who's editor at large, Wall Street Journal, has got a new book, American Breakdown: Why We No Longer Trust Our Leaders and Institutions. Gee, yeah, I mean, it's a sort of a how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. How do I not trust you? Let me count the ways. And why do I not trust you? The examples are myriad, aren't they? Like just the last few days that we've talked about, New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, who believes that she alone will decide when your rights shall be protected, government shall restrain itself from infringing upon them, and when they will not. So bold and unconstitutional was her action to suspend Second Amendment rights for the residents of Albuquerque and the surrounding area for 30 days.
30 days, yeah. So she had to do something, she says, Dan.
Just do something. U.S. District Court judge enjoined the suspension of carrying firearms, constitutionally protected. He enjoined that executive order under the auspices of public health that she issued. But that was before her attorney general. I mean, the state's attorney general, but the state's attorney general named Raul Torres, who happens to be from her party. He's a Democrat, Harvard educated too. Sent a letter to the governor saying this, which he also said publicly.
I think it flatly violates the Constitution of both the state and the federal Constitution. And so because I have a superseding obligation, a larger obligation to uphold the Constitution, I felt it was necessary to put my position in writing and inform her specifically that we wouldn't be defending the action.
Mm-hmm. Law enforcement more or less said the same thing for the same reasons, but of course it's always helpful to hear it from the chief law enforcement officer of the state. That would be the attorney general, Raul Torres. But why does somebody like Michelle Lujan Grisham think she can get away with translating her feelings into public policy? The need to do something should be unbounded by state or federal constitutions. Gerard Baker, editor-at-large, Wall Street Journal, the book, American Breakdown: Why We No Longer Trust Our Leaders and Institutions and How We Can Rebuild Confidence. Well, it's hard to rebuild confidence when people keep electing the Michelle Lujan Grishams of the world. But, Gerard, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan and Amy, for having me again. It's a pleasure to be here.
What's your diagnosis of this latest example of, I am the law from an American politician?
Yeah, I was thinking as I was listening to you, and I was thinking about this story over the last week or so, that I sometimes think these politicians are in a kind of a competition to say the most and say and do the more outrageous thing. It's kind of like, well, you can't say that. You thought this was bad. Well, hold my beer. I'm now going to just independently abrogate the second, eliminate the Second Amendment. I think I thank you very much for having me on, for talking about the book and among other things. But what I look at in the book is what's gone wrong in terms of why people don't trust our leaders anymore. And I think part of the problem here, and this is an interesting kind of manifestation of this Michelle Lujan Grisham issue, because what she's speaking to her base, right? That's part of the problem in this country right now is that, and again, thank goodness the Attorney General there came out, and thank goodness others have come out and said you can't do this. But in a sense, it doesn't matter anymore. It's like and this is why one of the reasons people don't trust politicians anymore. It kind of doesn't matter that whether or not you tell the truth. It doesn't matter whether or not you say things that are feasible. It doesn't matter whether you say things that are just, unacceptable or inconceivable. As long as you're somehow appealing to the emotions of, frankly, the small minority of Americans that is your base, you're fine. You're fine and dandy. And I think that is part of the wider problem in American discourse here, that people are not speaking to each other. Much more importantly, they're not really interested in doing anything. I don't believe for a second Governor Lujan Grisham is really, really planning to stop people from, even if she could, to take people's guns away from them. I don't think she thinks that for a second. It's just all about signaling. It's virtue signaling. It's I'm on your side. I'm going to, and when you're into that kind of a conversation, the more extreme, the more absurd, the more dangerous, frankly, the things you say, the more attention attention you get. Look how who was talking about Michelle Lujan Grisham 2 weeks ago? No one knew who she was, for goodness sake, you know. But now she's become an icon of the left, I bet. And she's made a name for herself. So it doesn't matter what she actually does. It doesn't matter that she can't obviously do this thing that she's proposed doing. She's become that absolutely vital modern American commodity, which is, you know, a kind of political celebrity.
Yeah, she's the left's new hero for the week. But she said she did it because there were 143 shootings of kids 18 and younger between 2017 and 2021. But if you look at those murders, it wasn't law-abiding citizens that were committing those murders. It was mostly gangbangers.
Right. And by the way, you know, again, I'm not familiar with her record, her executive record in office. But you know, let's also, you know, let's look at how gun crime, how violence has increased in so many American cities in the last 3 or 4 years. First of all, ask who controls those cities. Almost entirely and exclusively Democratic mayors and officials. And, you know, in many cases, and again, I don't know specifically about the case of New Mexico or Albuquerque or whatever, but in many of those cases, you know, they've been run by Democratic politicians who basically say, you know, we've got to be soft on the criminals. We've got to, you know, we're all at fault here. It's not, you know, we can't blame people who go out and shoot each other. Society's at fault. We're fundamentally, you know, we're systemically racist. We're systemically evil. We don't believe in prosecuting offenders. So, you know, we want to defund the police, all of that kind of nonsense that we've had to put up with. So, you know, so having done that for 3 or 4 years or longer, and then surprise, violence erupts, they then say, oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to actually take away your constitutional rights. I mean, this is just the sort of crazy kind of rhetorical doom loop that we've got ourselves into.
Well, right. There was a survey that was released this week that looked at you know, best country in the world sort of thing, surveying some representative sample. And if you pulled out the crosstab of just Americans, the number one country in the world, according to the Americans who participated in the survey, is Britain. America comes in fourth. And, you know, it's a small little anecdotal thing, but it speaks to a larger point that Victor Davis Hanson, among others, have been making, which is we no longer have confidence in America's culture. We no longer believe in America's goodness. I mean, I'm saying there's a divide on the issue, and maybe it's a majority, maybe it's a slight minority, but it's close. We no longer believe that America is exceptional in any meaningful way that distinguishes itself from the rest of the world. And so, as VDH wrote, and I keep repeating this because I think it's such an interesting formulation, you know, a society like the Roman Empire that loses faith in its culture, well, why do we need borders to protect? To protect ourselves? What are we protecting? We're not protecting anything. That's where we're at.
I agree. Look, Dan, I've been pleased to be on your show many times. You know me. I'm not kind of a political extremist at all. I'm not kind of head-banging. I've been very critical of a lot of things Republicans have done, including Donald Trump. But I really do believe, and I don't want to sound like a like a hysterical lunatic. I do believe that we are in the process of destroying our civilization. I think it's that bad. I think if you're sitting in China today, and by the way, China's got its own problems, or you're sitting even in Russia, God knows Russia's got problems, and you're looking at America and you're thinking, wait, this is a civilization. This is a country that basically has grown from nothing to be the most powerful country on earth. You know, it's incredible economic success. It's incredible strategic importance. It's civilizational success. It's won 2 hot wars in the 20th century and a Cold War. It has injected the world with its values, with its ideals. It's been an incredible success. And guess what? It's actually in the process of now tearing itself apart. Wow. What, you know, how did that happen? And I think that is the problem we're seeing. We've become this self-loathing society, and I talk about this in my book, by the way. Sorry to drag it back to the book, but the reason I say that people have lost trust in American institutions, as they have, as all the polling indicates they have, on a massive level, is because these institutions have been taken over in the last 20 years or so by people who fundamentally disavow American values and all of those values that made America the great country that it is. individual freedom, respect for equality for all, respect for freedom, respect for the free market, respect for our civilization and for everything that it stands for. All of those things are absolutely have been under assault for the last 20 years, and that is how this civilization is. I'm sorry to say it, if we don't reverse it, this civilization is dying. It is. We are not dying because the Visigoths have come over the Alps and destroyed us as they did with Rome. It's dying because we are killing ourselves.
Right. Well, so this is the great challenge, which is why I'd be interested in your insights on this. I'm sure you tackle it in the book, but so we erase all these lines, and then we think we can redraw them somewhere else, and it doesn't work that way. You erase the lines when it comes to marriage and marriage redefinition, which happened a decade ago, and now you're erasing the lines between the sexes. I mean, in terms of everything is a real or perceived identity. It's or perceived, and you erasing all the lines. You just described some, but the cultural lines too. And everything is politicized. Politics destroys everything it touches. So how do you reestablish the lines that provided restraints on the federal government, as well as social mores that restrained the individual from his and her excesses? So reestablishing the primacy of the family, and that is a model for a free society, as the building block of a free society. The church. How do you redraw the lines? I don't know that you can.
Well, I think it's up to people who. I mean, it's easy to kind of to see what's going on, and exactly. Forgive me for saying it. To offer the counsel of despair that you've just offered, and I completely understand it, and I don't blame people for doing it. But actually, again, I think this is as you know, I'm an immigrant to this country. I think this is a magnificent country, and I have always admired it. But I do think it's one of the great strengths of America that it doesn't kind of lie down. Americans, they don't lie down and just let these trends, these forces kind of just roll over them. At some point, they say, enough is enough, and we really have to take our country back. And I think, there have been times in the past, by the way, again, just to be positive about this, there have been times in the past when America's been under similar assault by elites.
Well, but I mean, so but is that what that's where is a great awakening, another great awakening? Is that the order of the day?
Yeah, I mean, people talk about that, fourth great awakening, whatever. I was thinking of something much more recent, actually. I was thinking of the 1960s. And look, a lot of good was done in the 1960s. We'd agree with that. The civil rights movement was very important. It started to, finally abolish some of those, a large part of that apparatus that was still, persecuting and discriminating against African Americans. A lot of good was done, but also but that's when things kind of became extreme. A lot of people, hating America first became a big deal in the 1960s, and we saw that with the fights over the Vietnam War and everything else. 1968. Again, I always say to people when people say, "Oh my God, how bad is it today?" Think about what it was like in 1968. You had political assassinations, you had domestic terrorism. Hundreds of Americans were dying in a war every week. The country was literally tearing itself apart back then. And you know what? There was a majority of what Richard Nixon, called the silent majority. There was a majority of people who said, stop. We're not going to do this anymore. We're actually going to stand up, and we're going to actually reassert our country's values, and we're going to do the right thing. My God, Richard Nixon's presidency obviously ended in its own catastrophe of trust 6 years later. But I think there's a point. Americans have demonstrated again and again, that as much as they're prepared to tolerate the kind of BS that we've had to tolerate for the last few years, there's a point where they say this much and no more. And I think there's a chance that they'll do that. I'm not particularly optimistic about the immediate future because, sorry to say this, but I don't think the choice on offer at the moment for the American people next year and next year's election is exactly is exactly an attractive one. It's not the choice that they were offered in 1968 or 1972 if it's going to be Donald Trump and Joe Biden. But I have enough faith in the American people to say that that something will emerge. I mean, that somebody will emerge and will champion these ideas in a way that is not in somebody who's not so flawed as Donald Trump. But
there's also
he represents right now the best hope for those people who want to champion those values. It's just a pity that he himself is such a flawed man.
Well, I mean, and this is one expectations game too. The idea that the walk back from where we find ourselves is going to occur in one presidential election, that's folly. Right. This is going to be a long road back to something resembling the the foundational principles of America being in force, repopularizing them.
But it starts somewhere,
Yeah.
Chairman Mao said,
Yeah.
church journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, and we've got to. And I think we're starting. I mean, by the way, I don't think it's all just bleak. I think we are seeing, I think there are even some of the brighter kind of progressives, the Democrats, are seeing that maybe they have pushed things a little bit too far. There are signs that people are willing to push back. Look, and again, I will say this: not a fan of the man, as you know, but Donald Trump's election itself in 2016 was the beginnings of Americans saying, you know what, we're not going to take any more of this.
Absolutely.
Again, the problem is that the problem with Donald Trump is, every conversation always comes down to Donald Trump, I'm afraid to say, but the problem with Donald Trump is that he turns so many Americans who I think otherwise would be open to that argument. I think they see him and they think, look, if that's the kind of person who's arguing for this, for taking America back to those values, I'm not sure I want to go there.
Yeah,
But
I understand. Well, that's that.
Is right.
Yeah, well, I mean, and frankly, this is part of Americans having to have the common sense to choose from imperfect choices and make the adult decision. And all this caterwauling is not particularly persuasive either. The choices are the choices. Gerard Baker, editor-at-large, Wall Street Journal. The new book, American Breakdown: Why We No Longer Trust Our Leaders and Institutions and How We Can Rebuild Confidence. Gerard Baker, thanks so much for joining us as always.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
Relief Factor, pain relief that's natural, pain relief that works, and pain relief that attacks the source of the pain. That's the experience of tens of thousands of Americans who are taking Relief Factor right now. See their incredible video